So Southern Cal's women's basketball program lands two really good transfer portal prospects over one weekend, and now all of a sudden they're on the same level or maybe even better than South Carolina. Are we serious right now?
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast, and also a staff writer for Gamecock Digest over on Fan Nation. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch for your team here today. We are free and available both on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. We got a couple of intriguing topics that we're going to dive into on today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. We're going to start off with some women's basketball talk, and more specifically, debate that's starting to rise on social media. So to give some backstory real quick, Stanford had a forward that entered the portal this past week in Kiki Iriafen. Kiki Iriafen was viewed by everyone to be immediately the best prospect in the transfer portal. She was supposed to visit South Carolina this week. However, she was going to visit Southern Cal this past weekend. The visit to Southern Cal happened, and she wound up eventually committing. On top of that, the Trojans also landed Oregon State transfer guard Talia von Oelhoffen. So they landed two of the better transfer portal prospects in women's college basketball in just one weekend. A pretty good haul for Southern Cal to go along with the number one recruiting class in the high school ranks for this cycle. What is happening, however, now that these moves have taken place is some people are actually starting to pose the question, is Southern Cal the best team in women's college basketball, or have they at least gotten to the same level as South Carolina? And if you don't believe me, I got a couple of social media posts that I want to throw up real quick. The first one is from a social media account called I Talk Hoops. Now, this has about 11,000 followers, and it specifically follows women's college basketball. I would say this is a pretty big account for the sport at this very moment in time. And they said, literally earlier today on Monday, on paper, USC, as in Southern Cal, is our preseason number one team for the 2024-25 season. On top of that, Talia Goodman, who does a lot of good things for the Next, and she also, I believe, is a contributor on Locked On Women's Basketball, does a lot of great stuff. I follow her, and I like a lot of the things that she does. But I just disagree with what she did here. She talked about how USC, again as in Southern Cal, might be the best team in the country. Then she jokingly followed up by saying, it is up to your interpretation to decide which USC, with a winking face emoji. So, it could mean Southern Cal, it could mean South Carolina. Then she followed up again with one final post saying, if Talia von Oelhoffen ends up at USC, the might be gets erased, essentially saying that she would look at them as the best team in the country over South Carolina if they landed Talia von Oelhoffen from Oregon State. So, what should we make of all of this? Couple things. The first thing that I want to point out here mainly revolves around South Carolina. Obviously, Gamecock fans for several years have been quite upset with the coverage, or maybe sometimes lack thereof, that the women's basketball program gets, despite how dominant the team has been over the last 4 or 5 years in particular. And last season's a good example. Despite being undefeated, going all the way to the national championship game, the team that got more talk automatically was the Iowa Hawkeyes because of Caitlin Clark. And when Gamecock fans bring that up, they're never saying they shouldn't get any coverage. They absolutely should. Caitlin Clark definitely deserved a lot of coverage. But the whole point that South Carolina fans make when this kind of stuff happens is the coverage should be equal. Like, if you're going to talk about Juju Watkins at Southern Cal, fine. Or Paige Beggars at UConn, well deserved. Talk about South Carolina like you do those individual players and or the programs that they play for. And it just doesn't seem like that happens. And this kind of leads into a bigger question, in my opinion, regarding women's college basketball as a whole. Some people might tell me that I am not qualified to even ask the question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Do y'all think that there's a problem with the marketing of women's college basketball? Here's what I mean by this. What other sport in North America can a team go undefeated, win a national championship in the process, lose not just only one starter, lose only one player off that championship winning roster from the previous season, Camila Cardoso in this case, and then heading into next year because another team brings in a whole new slate of players, talented, sure, but brings in a whole new slate of players, all of a sudden now the national champion is not viewed as the number one team in the country. Again, this is not to discredit Southern Cal. Southern Cal made some big moves this past weekend. Their high school recruiting class is quite good. Might be on the same level as the freshies that South Carolina brought in the 2019 recruiting cycle. I'm not trying to take anything away from them. And I'm sure South Carolina fans will not try to take anything away from them when they talk about this on social media, like they already have to a great extent to this point. But is there a problem with how you market the sport where you have a champion like South Carolina and you're already putting a team up above them because of them landing two portal players? I mean, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? When people talk about how much coverage Caitlin Clark and Iowa got after the national title game that they lost over the winners and the team that went undefeated, you should already take that as a subtle message or sign that maybe we're going a bit too far covering just one player and one team above everyone else, including arguably, undoubtedly, the best team in the sport. And yet, it seems like every single season, even after going undefeated, people who cover South Carolina, people who follow South Carolina have to deal with these same exact questions, with these same dilemmas. The Gamecocks, quite frankly, not getting the love they deserve. And again, when we say that, or a fan says that, no one's saying South Carolina has to be the only team and program that you talk about. Gamecock fans wouldn't be upset about it, but they're reasonable. This is a good fan base, a well-educated fan base in women's basketball. But why are we going around doing this? I'm serious. Like, you have a great opportunity to grow this sport. You're going to cap that growth when you do stuff like this. Because other people, they will get put off by you doing stuff like this. What other sport would this happen? I don't think there would be another sport where it would happen. But again, some people might say, I don't even deserve to talk about it, and we'll just save it for another day. But let's just say, any notion that Southern Cal is all of a sudden now a better team than South Carolina is 100% ridiculous. How about Southern Cal makes it to a Final Four? Then maybe we'll see if they deserve to be in the same breath as South Carolina. Right now, no one deserves to be in the same breath as South Carolina. Not even a UConn. Sorry. You go 7-8 years without winning a national title, you fall a notch or two. That's reality. That's the way that sports goes now. So, wanted to talk about that to start the show because I'm sure that this is a big topic of conversation amongst women's basketball fans here in South Carolina. But to move on to some more happy talk, South Carolina, they offered one of the best prospects in the country for the 2026 class just a few days ago. And when you watch her highlights on YouTube, it's pretty easy to see why. We'll talk about this prospect in a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that. But there is just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up others' boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, along with cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, and hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games, like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now, free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Welcome back to this Monday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. And as always, a big thank you to each and every one of you everydayers who make the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your daily listen, wherever you get your audio podcasts daily, or your daily watch on YouTube. Dawn Staley and the South Carolina Gamecocks dispensed an offer to 2026 five-star guard Jacy Abii recently. She's a prospect out of Frisco, Texas, and when you look at her skill set, watching some YouTube highlights, if added to the roster, she would help continue the offensive evolution that the Gamecocks have undergone over the past couple of years. Now, when you go and watch her highlights on YouTube, there's a bevy of things that stand out, primarily, obviously, on the offensive side of the ball. One thing to note is Jacy Abii, she is the primary facilitator for her team. And so she has already had to learn how to read the entire court. And it shows through her court vision. It shows through her being able to find weak side cutters that are going to the basket when she is over on the wing. She also has a nice shooting stroke from behind the arc, and she can pull up really at any point. She can pull up off the dribble, or she can shoot while she is on the move. I'm also going to assume, therefore, because of that she's pretty good stationary as well, but sometimes you do have some oddities in shooters where they're a lot better when they're on the move instead of actually being able to stand there and gather before they put the ball up towards the rim. She's also quite smooth with her ball handling. She is not somebody that's going to pull off some razzle-dazzle type moves like a Malaysia Fulwiley, but she's not going to lose control of the ball very easily. She also can drive to the basket and finish through contact. So when you combine that with her ball handling ability, it makes her pretty tough to stop once she finds an open driving lane and she gets a full head of steam. But if you close off those driving lanes and don't allow her to get to the basket, she's okay with that because she also possesses a mid-range jumper in her game as well. So she is someone that can score at all three levels. South Carolina hasn't really had that at the guard spot for a while. Now, you could argue now that they have a couple players on their team, like a Malaysia Fulwiley, who mainly is sort of shooting three-pointers or driving straight to the basket, or a Tessa Johnson, who probably is the better option as a three-level scorer, somebody that's willing to drive to the opposite baseline and go off the backboard, somebody, though, that can also go to the paint and do a little spinning fadeaway and put the ball through the hoop as well, along with, obviously, her rainbow-like three-point shots. So, Jacy Abii, she is somebody to follow for the 2026 class, no question about that. And I believe that going into that season, Fulwiley would be a junior, Tessa Johnson would be a junior, and Madison McDaniel, who has not, I believe, gotten to campus yet, she would be obviously 1 year behind those two. So, Jacy Abii, she would have the opportunity to sit behind those three for a year, get acclimated, and it would make the transition after Fulwiley and Tessa Johnson, which obviously you don't have to worry about for several years, but beyond those two players, if you land a player like Jacy Abii, you don't have to change how you attack offensively because she is crafty and she's got the shooting ability to make an impact at that guard spot. And make sure that South Carolina doesn't have to go back to, again, the way that they kind of used to play, which is we're going to settle in the half court and we're just going to constantly throw the ball down low, even if there isn't an opening there. So keep an eye out on Jacy Abii in the 2026 class from this point moving forward. Now, South Carolina's baseball team, they secured a massive series win over the then number 4 ranked Kentucky Wildcats this past weekend in Founders Park. And they showed a lot of good stuff. Some signs that maybe, just maybe, this is the series where they might have turned a corner. We'll discuss why in a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL, and baseball's in full swing. So FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. The Minnesota Timberwolves, they looked really good against the Phoenix Suns over the past couple of days. They swept the Suns 4-0 in the first round. And so when you look at the Western Conference odds right now, odds to win the Western Conference, the Timberwolves sit at plus 440, which is the third best odds behind the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Denver Nuggets. So if you're looking for a Cinderella type team in the Western Conference, the Minnesota Timberwolves, they might be the team to put some money on. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Today's show is also brought to you by GameTime. GameTime is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the GameTime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for games at the ballpark. The Atlanta Braves have been doing quite well to start the 2024 season, and they got a little bit of a road stretch before they come back home on May the 7th when they take on the Boston Red Sox. If you go to that game, right now you can get tickets as cheap as $19 in the grandstands. You could potentially win a free cap. They're giving away 15,000 caps to obviously the first 15,000 fans that are in attendance for that game. So if you're looking to get a souvenir while at the ballpark, that would be a good game to go to. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the GameTime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your team every single day in just 30 minutes. As we talked about a little bit ago, South Carolina's baseball team, they showed us all something a little bit different this past weekend against the Kentucky Wildcats. The Gamecocks secured a 2-1 series win over number 4 Kentucky, helping themselves in the rankings and also when it comes to odds of hosting a regional potentially come postseason time. But getting back to how they won this series, the Gamecocks did it in a variety of ways. Let's start off with the coaching. Now, Mark Kingston, if there's one thing that he's caught a lot of flack for throughout his tenure here in Columbia, it has been sometimes the unwillingness to make adjustments when it seems like the team needs a spark. Baseball is truly one of those sports where you cannot really game plan yourself to a win. I mean, you can, but you've got a lot more buttons that you have to press that you can't necessarily do in football. But in baseball and basketball, it could legitimately lead to you winning a series or winning a close game. And I would say that happened this weekend. You go back to the Friday night game, South Carolina being down multiple runs, I believe 4-1 going to the bottom of the ninth. They not only got a bunch of clutch hits, literally clutch in the sense they got 3 solo home runs, but Mark Kingston and the staff, they put multiple guys in the game that were left-handed batters against Kentucky's right-handed closer, and it worked out to perfection. One of those guys was Gavin Casas. Casas did not start the series. He typically plays first base, and after some, fielding errors that took place at shortstop earlier, I believe, in that same game, in game 2, the coaching staff made the decision to put Casas out there at third base, a position he never has played, I believe, at South Carolina, and moved Talmadge Lecroy over to shortstop. So yes, they sacrificed some fielding ability, and that definitely showed itself a couple times the rest of the way, but they added some offense in there as well. Gavin Casas had a really good weekend, and Mark Kingston's willingness to make a switch and adjustment like that is part of the reason why it happened. Going back to the batting real quick, talked about those clutch hits in Friday night's game, but also the team had some single inning explosions that took place against the Wildcats in games 2 and 3. You go back to game 2, they scored 6 runs in the very first inning of the game. And then in the third game, I believe in the second, third, or fourth inning, I'm going to be honest, I forget which one it was, they scored, I believe, 4 or 5 runs. And they mounted it turned out to be an insurmountable lead that the Wildcats were not going to be able to come back from, winning that game 10-0 and run ruling the Wildcats in the process. And then we got to talk about pitching, and I get it. Saturday night, it was not a good night for the pitching staff. It was probably one of their worst games that they had all season long. But one guy I want to talk about and give a shout out to, Dylan Eskew. This guy has been through a lot this season, started out the year as a part of the starting rotation, and then had some trouble getting some consistent outings. Every time he would go up against a batting lineup the second time around, he would get knocked around for multiple runs typically. And that obviously is a bad sign because it typically means that the opposing team is getting a beat on your pitches a lot quicker than you would like. So Eskew essentially got benched after a bad start against Alabama back on March 29th. Obviously has been working on some stuff, and it's paid off for him. The past 2 weeks, his best 2 starts all season long, and go figure, it came against number 2 Arkansas and number 4 Kentucky at home. But look, this is something that the staff, the players, and the fans need to see, because the pitching staff obviously was the biggest concern coming into this season. They've had multiple guys step up. Obviously, Eli Jones has been a very good ace for them for the most part. A guy like Garrett Gainey offering a lot of, I would say, fire and vinegar in that bullpen as their closer. And even a guy like Connor McCreary, who has gotten a lot better as this season's gone on. He's carved out a role for himself in that bullpen. But Dylan Eskew, they needed someone else to step up behind Jones in the starting rotation. And it seems like Dylan Eskew, for the time being, has figured some things out to where maybe he could be put back in that starting rotation and be, who knows, the Sunday guy moving forward for this team. So, not going to go too far and say, hey, this means that the season now is going to get turned around. They figured out a lot of things. They did do well this past weekend. They did some things that they've struggled to do all year. But now they've got to prove that it wasn't a sort of one-off series performance. You go on the road to play Missouri this next weekend. I know Missouri's record is awful and in the dumpster, but they have played South Carolina real tough the past couple years, and they beat South Carolina in the series 2 years ago when they last traveled to the other Columbia in Missouri. So cannot overlook them. Then you host number 19, Georgia, 2 weekends from now. Charlie Condon, the best power hitter in all college baseball. Let's just call it like it is right now. And then the last series of the year you play at, I believe, currently number 3, Tennessee. So it's not going to get any easier for South Carolina, to say the least. We'll see if they can parlay this weekend's performance into those last 3 weeks. If they can, then hey, the team might be peaking at just the right time heading into postseason play. With that being said, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. Hope that y'all thoroughly enjoyed today's show as always. What are y'all's thoughts on the media talk surrounding Southern Cal after what they did this past weekend? Do you think it's a bit ridiculous? And if so, how ridiculous do you think it is? What are your thoughts on Jacy Abii, the 2026 5-star guard that Dawn Staley offered, and what she could bring to the program if they're able to land her, of course, at the end of the process? And what are your thoughts on the baseball team and what they did this past weekend against Kentucky? Do you think that they've officially turned the corner? Let me know all of your thoughts down below in the comment section on YouTube, or you can shoot me a message on X at @alion_SC. Once again, thank y'all so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Monday and a fantastic start to the work week. And I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.